Welcome to the stream. So we're gonna do two streams this week, and today's stream we're gonna test out the buff and debuff system, and once that is set, then tomorrow I'm gonna write an article for part 23, and this means that I should be able to do the recording for it next week for the content itself, and then part 23 should be released. Well, the article is going to be released tomorrow, if all goes right. And the video, probably 2 weeks in. So in the last stream, we managed to put together the buff debuff system, but there wasn't time to test it out. So this will be first thing that we're going to be doing for today. So let me just see where I can add this. We probably have to modify the weapon system as well, right? So that we can have some weapons apply debuffs. So the garlic, for example, applies a debuff. And I'm not sure how long the debuff lasts. But let's code this with garlic in mind. So if the enemy is not immune to debuffs, each sheet applies 0.3 knockback to the enemy until the maximum knockback they can take, and minus 0.1 to freeze resistance until it reaches 0. So what should we call the garlic debuff? We can just call it garlic, I guess. So let's try out the debuff system. I'm gonna create a new buff under scriptable object right here, and let's create a new buff data. Let's call this buff garlic, and for the icon we can just use the garlic icon itself, right? I think that makes a lot of sense. Garlic. And the type of debuff is going to be it's debuff, and there is how many levels are there? So we want it to be stackable, right? So we want it to stack fully, because every time you get hit with the garlic, you get a knockback multiplier boost, right? Plus 0.3 knockback. So this would be 0.3, and it reduces your freeze resistance as well. So this means that we have to change because it reduces your freeze resistance, so I think we have to change the enemy stats as well, right? To introduce negative resistances. I think that makes sense. Thank you for the comment. I hope you enjoyed part 22 if you haven't seen the video. I'm looking forward to getting the buff system out, because just filling in the fields for the buff, it's exciting me a little bit, you know. I wasn't looking forward to the stream today because I was really lazy, but then once I saw the code, I got interested. I'm excited to see how this turns out, but we have to go back to the enemy stats script and allow resistances to fall to a negative value. So probably have to change this to -1, or like, I think -1 makes sense. Shouldn't be more than -1, right? So then this allows us to, you know, shift the resistances to negative value as well. So let me just, this should be -0.1, so it reduces their freeze resistance by -0.1, and knockback multiplier is increased by 0.3. So this debuff is gonna stack which means that the more you hit an enemy with the garlic, the more every time you hit an enemy with garlic buff will apply. Maybe it makes sense to write a description for the buff as well. Does it make sense? Okay, so I came from a Warcraft background, so I would actually want to have a description for the buff as well. So let me just create a new string description. And how do we turn this into a text area? Like this, right? So what I want is for the description area to have an area like that. I think that's pretty nice. Let me see what the different multi-line. What's text area 3? I'm just playing around the fields to see what I can get. So the buff and debuff, right, is to allow us, because we may want to create an interface that shows the buffs or the debuffs, and if we do that, then the description will appear when you mouse over the buff and debuff. Though now, because we don't have an interface for that, I'm not sure if this makes sense. Okay, maybe we can just leave the description out first, and we can add it in later on if we want to have a UI system for buffs and debuffs. When can we expect the next Metroidvania? Like, so the Hollow Knight stream, right? I'm working with Joseph right now. Joseph is very active in the forums, and he's made the various 0.5 videos that you see for Metroidvania. I think it's gonna take like a month plus. So we are working towards part 11, deciding what we want to do for it. Not just in terms of features, but also in terms of how do we build a base that we can use to build extra features as well. So this is what I've done for the Vampire Survivor series. So I want to make sure that the Metroidvania series has that as well. So then in the future we can help you to make your Metroidvania games in two ways. One way is of course to teach you how to build them from bottom up, but we also want to make the option of learning from the top down available as well, which means that you pay for the Patreon, you get the files, and then you modify the files from there. So then there'll be a set of videos showing you how you can adapt the project files into the game that you want. So right now in the Vampire Survivor series, we are building systems, right? And then these systems, you can use them if you build them from the ground up. You can also use them if you just download our Patreon files and then you modify the project. Though the videos for doing that not there yet, we are planning to create videos like that. And this is only possible if you have a robust base for your code. And this is what we are working on building right now. We are looking into, because it took me a while to figure out what direction I want to take for the Vampire Survivor series as well, and we're in the process of working on that for the Metroidvania series. So Joseph will be the one who will be recording part 11. We have to decide on the content first, so give us some time. It's gonna take a while. I wouldn't say it won't be quick, but it's gonna take a month plus least. So we have the buff. This buff doesn't do any damage. How long does the buff last for the garlic? Does it last forever? I think it lasts forever, you know. So if the duration is the duration is 1.3, that's the buff duration, is it? Hitbox delay card. I think the buff just lasts for 1.3 seconds. So every stack lasts for 1.3 seconds and the stacks are separate. I think that's how it works. Doesn't do any damage, right? So we gotta make sure to not have a damage per second, no hit per second as well. Tick interval, we can just forget about it. Doesn't matter because it doesn't do any damage. Doesn't affect the player as well, so the player modifier is empty. So you just gotta apply and just gotta add a knockback multiplier here and just minus 0.1 for the freeze resistance. And we should be ready to go. The other thing that we gotta ask ourselves is, let me just modify the enemy stats script first. How many parts do we have right now? We have 1, 2, let me just add a table of contents. Get a sense of that. Table of contents. Implementing a buff tracking system. Let's take a look at the new system. So we have went back to enemy stats here and made a change to the instances script. So right here, resistance, there we go. So this is no longer 0, right? It's now 1. It's minus 1. So replace the 0 here with a minus 1. And resistance possible. So what we have here is, well, we have an option to reduce the freeze resistance for the player or for anyone with debuff. So next thing we want to do is to, if we apply entity stats to enemy stats, I think we have, right? We've updated this and it's documented as well, I assume. It's documented for enemy stats and it should be documented for player stats as well. So next up, now that we have the debuff system, is to work it into the weapons. So our weapons should have the option for us to assign debuffs. So the debuffs can fall under the values section, right? Debuffs applied. Where should we add a debuff? Weapon data is the only place. Then we have this section here, right? So if we want our weapons to apply buffs and debuffs, we can just add buffs to it. So that is under the stats struct. So let's find the stats struct, and under values here, public buff data. Should it be an array of buffs? Because some weapons can give us multiple buffs, right? Make sense? Okay, just one buff here. Light buff. So every level has a different applied buff. Does it make sense to make this into an array instead, and then we can have the drop down here, applied buffs. This will be a set of buffs that the weapon applies. This certainly makes more sense, right? We can just put the garlic buff here. So then let's say if we have weapons that apply multiple buffs, then we can, add multiple buffs here. So right now we just have one buff, and we just have to modify the weapon so that every time it deals damage, it applies buff. Maybe we can add a new header for these buffs. I think that works very well. So this is the knife, so it shouldn't have any buffs. So let me just remove this. So there shouldn't be any buffs for applied buffs here for knife. Only weapon that applies a buff is the garlic weapon, right? Applies one single buff, and that buff is garlic. So we have to also go back to the weapon script and look for the damage function. Does it have a damage function? It's an attack function. It doesn't have a damage function. How do we apply a buff to the weapon? Let's look at the other scripts. Let's look at, for starters, the projectile script first. Under weapons and projectile weapon. So there is a attack function here. And projectile prefab has not been set. And just attack here, deals damage. So for the projectile weapons themselves, I don't think we need to do anything. There are parts where just deals damage. So we have to find all the parts of our weapon that deal damage, and then we have to make sure to apply the buffs. This is a little troublesome. Like the whip weapon, for example, right? Does it deal damage? Doesn't deal damage. Only the lightning ring deals damage. So we just have to find the projectile weapon effect, because this is the one that deals damage, right? So then this means that we have to find the part in the projectile script that deals damage, and then can apply the buff. Which is right here. So deals damage and destroys the projectile. What else do we have? Here we have modifying the range of resistances. And what's the other thing we did? Modifying weapon stats. There. So we modify weapon.stats to receive buff data, and we also have to change the operator. So this will become the result. Applied buffs equals to S2 applied buffs equals to now S2 applied buffs, then this one applied buffs. Let me just check whether this is required in ChatGPT. So The condition here is quite long. I'm not sure if we need this part, because if this is now, then I think that may just work fine. I don't think we need to. And we apply buffs this way. We're very close with the buff system. I'm very excited. Let's just give me a moment to reply to something, and then we'll continue coding. Okay, so what does ChatGPT say? It says, is it possible? We have to check for empty array cases as well. So this is valid. This is what we have to do. Unfortunately, it's a very long statement. Okay, we don't need this part. Right. Open stats script, and we have one extra added line here, and it's extra section of it. This is the weapon.cs script. This one, this is any stats. Okay, and so once we make the modifications here, we have to find the projectile script, because most of our weapons deal damage via the projectile. So then when the projectile deals damage, it's gonna check whether the weapon has any buffs to apply, and it just applies the buffs, which means apply buff. Sorry, we have to get owner first. Owner actual is the actual stats. Weapon. Weapon stats. Weapon get set. So here we want to do the following. For each buff data B, get stats. Like buffs. Apply all. Okay. Oh, we have a new subscription. Thank you for subscribing if you're on the stream. Otherwise, can be just someone watching our video and subscribing. Anyway, I appreciate it regardless. So we loop through all the applied buffs and we apply the buff like this. So we apply or assign buffs, target, Just do just one instruction. Oh, we get the stats here, so we can just move this down. Yes, yes, okay. Okay. Yeah, that's it. So for the projectile, so applying the bar, integrating the bar system. Integrating the bar. You need a $5 one. $2 one is not enough. $2 one just helps. $2 one is if you want to donate to us. $5 if you want to access the content. So with $5, you'll be able to access the project files, the articles, and the last one is $10. So once we add more parts to the series, we may revise the pricing a little bit. We're also rolling out a new system to bring more benefit to the $2 patrons as well. And I'm also aware that we have viewers from countries that are less prosperous, and for people from these countries, it's difficult to fork out like $5 or $10 for the content. So we are also rolling out a program that will allow people from poorer regions to be able to afford the Patreon subscriptions more easily. So just stay tuned. I'm planning to roll these things out over the next month or so. So September or October, you should see something. We're also releasing a new video about how to create visual effects for Hollow Knight today. It should drop today. I'm not sure when Joseph is gonna drop it, but it's coming. So you can look forward to that one. That would be free. So what we are planning to do, right, is that because we do have quite a few things we need help with, so we will be rolling out an experience system. So you'll be rewarded for participating in the forums, for answering questions that other members have, and through doing that, you will get experience points, and these experience points can be exchanged to unlocking articles permanently on the site. That's what we're working on. So then you can get everything for free, but you have to participate in the forums and you have to help people with their coding questions on the forums. So in the meantime, the videos should suffice. It takes a bit more effort, but the videos should be able to help you create what you need for your Metroidvania game. So we've got the buffs and debuffs applied for projectiles. Let me just document changes in block. Modifying the range of resistances. Modifying weapon stats to accept buff data. Then we also have modifying right here. Let me make one more modification actually. So for the projectile, we are gonna make it so that there is a possibility of the projectile, because damage is always applied by the weapon effect, right? The only exception to that is the lightning ring actually, that just deals damage directly. Other than that, the most of our weapons deal damage using the weapon effect. So you'll find prefabs for all of these weapon effects. Like for example, you find prefabs of projectiles, and well, we can just add one more option to the projectile, right? The projectile has an auto aim, has a rotation speed, and it also has, let's also add a buff ratio, and let me just add a tooltip to that. Percentage of apply reference. This will be a tooltip, and this will also be a range 0 to 1. So public low by default this will be 1. So what this allows us to have is a slider. It gives us a slider, and this slider will adjust the chance that a buff is applied. Let me just call this weapon buff chance. Describes everything more clearly. Weapon buff chance. Hi Gentleman Gaming. The plan today is to implement the buff and debuff system. So right now, in the last stream, we managed to create the whole buff system, right? So the buffs remove themselves. Now we have to test it out. But to test it out, we have to integrate it into our weapon system first. So then I'm modifying the projectiles and the auras that we have to apply the buffs and the debuffs. So what I've just done is, if you look at the weapon data that we have here, there is a new array here to apply buffs. I don't know if you can see this. There we go. So we have applied buffs over here. So there's an array of buffs that you can apply, and the only weapon that has buffs right now is the garlic, which I'm applying in the wrong place. This should be applied here. So the garlic has a buff. So then the garlic buff itself is a buff data where we configure the garlic to reduce the freeze resistance by -0.1 and increase the knockback multiplier by 0.3. So this is very interesting. I think we have a problem here because it's not possible for us to add a negative value to damage and move speed and all that stuff, right? So I think we have to also modify the enemy stats to allow for different values to get to the negative. Like for example, the curse boost over here. Oh man, why is it a value over here? This shouldn't be a value, right? This should be, because in the enemy itself it's not a value, right? Over here, why is this a... The enum is not showing up correctly. Let's see the enemy prefab. See, the curse boost should be a drop down, shouldn't be a value. But it's appearing as a value inside our scriptable object. You know what? But you know that's actually fine. It's okay. So we have to modify the, let's modify the stats. For the player stats, can we set the health to be negative? We can. So the issue is only with the enemy stats. I didn't look far ahead enough. So for the enemy stats here, we're gonna have to find the range of the stats. And let's modify, this shouldn't be a minimum of 0. We can just remove this one thing. So then it's just unbounded. And we don't want the curse boost to be inside the stats because it's not doing whatever that it needs to. We can move this out. I think that'll be better. Then this will default value here will just be first boost, which is boostable, and level boost is 0. So we can remove this. Makes more sense like that. Let me just put the boost. So we're moving the boost outside, which makes a bit more sense because otherwise the boosts do not do anything inside the debuff section. But then we will have to change our code to accommodate that. So this means that this S1 factor I'm thinking of a way to get this to work, because if we move this out, then this breaks our code as well. So maybe it's not that good of an idea. But I don't want the boost to be showing as numbers. Have to ensure that the struct is serializable system. Does that work? No, it doesn't work. What else can we do? Right. Okay, we just leave this as it is first. It's not a major issue. Just want to remove the restriction. Right here, let me just update the blog post also. So under enemy stats, That's which is not here, which is yeah. Modifying the range of this. So we want to remove, want to do this, and we want to also remove this cap because we want to be able to have our debuffs apply positive or negative values. So then this cap doesn't serve us any purpose. So now we can apply debuffs to the health as well for both the enemy and the player. For the curse boost and level boost, we'll just ignore it. Can't really do anything about it. If we want to keep it there, then it's gonna show up as a number. I think in a later version of Unity, this probably will be fixed. But well, we're using 2020, so with some minor serialization issue, it shouldn't be a problem. And one thing I also remember is that we have to add the duration buff, right, to the buffs. So this means that let me see. So with the apply buffs, there is a get duration, right? Somewhere. So in the let's work this out in the projectile first. Weapon buff chance. So it just applies the buffs, and we want to also have the duration stat boost the duration of the buff, right? So if you recall in the Vampire Survivors stats, there is a duration stat that modifies the duration of your buffs and debuffs, and this affects a bunch of weapons. Ironically, it doesn't affect the Lancet, Clock Lancet. It's strange. That means the amount of extra projectiles, luck, growth. I think growth is not. Do we have growth as a stat? We have growth as well. It's not integrated as well. Oh gosh. We have greed. We have curse. Curse is integrated. So just growth. I think growth we can always just make a quick modification. Maybe I'll just do a 0.5 video for this. Amount, duration. Well, I would like to have the duration value increase the duration of your buffs and debuffs. So which means that for the projectile that applies this, where damage is dealt, right? We apply the buff, and oh, it's very simple. So under apply buff, right, we can have a multiplier as well. So apply buff, and then there is a variant that we're applying, and then we also have a duration that we're applying. So this means we have a float, and a duration multiplier. So this by default is 1f. Duration multiplier. New buff. Where is the buff? Remaining duration. So here, this will be float duration. And we'll just grab duration and multiply it by the multiplier. So this allows us to later just put the duration stat in and increase the duration. Multiplier, duration multiplier, duration multiplier. So then by applying, when we apply the buff, we can also specify a optional duration multiplier to increase the duration of that the buff will last for. And this will have to be applied to all sections of buffs, right? So all the buffs should have the duration multiplier. And then this allows us in the projectile weapon to grab the owner stats, owner actual. So then duration. So duration basically just a multiplier, right? So this is -1 because it's first variant. Apply all assigned buffs to target. We have to also think about how to apply the buff to the weapon. So in the garlic here, our buffs have different levels. So then we have to also have data about what the level of the buff is. Give me a moment, I'm gonna be right back. So we have to figure out how to modify our interface so that the buff that we apply, we can also specify a level for it. So here we don't want to just apply the buff because the buff has multiple levels to it, right? So we have to maybe find a way to supply an index, and the index will be index 0, and then index 1, 2, and so on. So for the buff, under apply buff here, we have variant. This variant can make it 0, not -1. And stats. Or we can just make it so that the buff that is applied corresponds to the current level of the weapon. That makes sense, right? So if the weapon is like level 8, if you have a corresponding level of buff, it will just apply the buff. Otherwise, it applies the highest level of buff. That makes sense, right? Doesn't it? And then we don't have to have so many fields. So this means that if I attach the garlic buff to the weapon, because the garlic buff only has 1 level, it's just gonna apply the first level buff. Otherwise, it's gonna apply different buff. But it also makes sense for us to be able to explicitly set the value of the weapon's buffs. So we have garlic buff data. Or we can also create buff info. We can call it anything we want really. It's just a data type that we are using to. So the buff info is going to contain the buff data. Click buff data. And also the Can I press everything in a single line? And then here, this can be a buff info array state. Then we can just remove the header because we don't need the buff info and buff data. Buff. This should be buff info. This would be weapon.stats.buff. This should be b.big. And so now when we apply a buff, we can assign the buff data and a variant of buff. This variant can be actually a unsigned integer. We just add that in the buff data. What I'm thinking now is that this may be a little hard to use. Buff data, then we have the variant. The variant is the level of the buff, right? So the buff data here, this will be garlic, and then this will be level 1. You know what, actually this is fine. Just leave it at variant 0. I think that's completely okay. And we should be able to get our weapons to apply debuffs now. And if the projectile is homemade, So now this here will be, where's the apply buff data? This will be the variant, right? Variant is gonna be a apply or assign buffs to the target. Updating player stats. Weapons to apply. Apply. So we have to modify the projectile and we have to modify the apply buff as well. So let's open our Aura script and let's do the same thing with that. So under weapons, weapon effects, and Aura. So wherever we deal damage to the enemy, we can also apply the buff. It's just the same thing, so we can just copy and paste this entire section. Okay. So apply or assign buffs. Target, this will be pair key apply buff. Simple, right? It's done. And then now we just gotta make sure that we check all our weapons to see if the buffs are working properly. So the only weapon that is not able to apply the buff would be because all these weapons deal damage via their projectile or via their weapon effect, which means that you don't have to modify the weapon script themselves, except for Lightning Ring. Because Lightning Ring here, the damage is dealt inside the script itself. Which means that we will have to also do this. We will also have to let's put the changes here first. So the change, highlight this part here, and we also added some comments. So that's for projectile, right? Where's the projectile script? Get the weapon stats. So I've also added some comments. You can just highlight that as well. So this just deals damage, it doesn't destroy the projectile. So you can edit the comment here as well. So the Aura script is a little bit more straightforward. So this one just CS. So lastly, the Lightning Ring. also the aura script. Also we have aura. So for the lightning ring, if you wanted to apply buffs and debuffs, have to. Well, it's the same piece of code all everywhere, right? Maybe we can. Hey, actually, we can just put this into Python script. You can just add a new function in the weapon script. Apply buff. This will be public. Stats. Public boolean apply. Mix the weapon apply. So this anyway, since this piece of code always repeats itself, we can actually just create a function and then we can just do that. And this will be just that. This will be apply buff. I don't have anything. Void here. So then once we have this, where's the weapon script again? Weapon script is somewhere. Set buff data. So this function here, we just drop it here. So then if we do that, then we can just go back to our code here and apply or assign buffs to the target. So under projectile here, this will become weapon apply buffs. Buffs are applied to enemy stats effect. Then the same logic applies to the aura. Side buffs. Okay. This will be pair.key. And lightning ring weapon, for the lightning ring weapon, it's the same thing. I will just do apply buffs. This. So, this is the projectile. This is the aura weapon. So the line that's added is here. Applies all the buffs. Same thing here. Buffs. And under the lightning ring, we add one extra line to apply the buffs as well. So with that done, the weapons that we have should apply buffs properly now. So because we've assigned this to the garlic, right? The garlic should be able to assign to apply buffs now. And to make the buff appear more obvious, we can add a tint. So enemies who get the debuff will be tinted something. Okay, this tint is tricky because we have to integrate the tint. And we have the buff effect here as well, which we have to apply. So we have one more here. This is for modifying lightning ring weapon to apply. Applying visual effects. So for the visual effects of the buff, the buff has to take into account the sprite of the enemy as well. So the enemy itself is it has a kill fade function, and it has a original color over here. So does the player, right? The player has something like that as well. Let me just check it out. player doesn't have that. So we have to build a tinting system as well for the stats, because in the buff we have two options. We have one particle system here, which is just you can assign a particle system. It will spawn that particle system on the player, so this will show a buff. And then there is also a tint. This tint just changes the color. Okay, so we've got to figure out how to work that one out. Okay, this is more complicated than I thought it would be. Thought this would be a lot simpler. How do we work this out? So we have a health here. We probably are gonna have to turn the feedback system into the same thing as well. I'll be right back. I'm just gonna get myself a cup of tea, and the walking will help me to sort out my thoughts. I kind of have an idea of what I want to do, but I need to think things through a little bit, and the walk will help me to piece things together. And after that, when I come back, we should be able to get the buff system. So back in 15 minutes. back and I've thought through a couple of things while getting my tea. And let's just sort out the visuals first, and then there are a couple of things we also have to address, which is the debuff resistance and the freeze resistance, right? We have to address both things as well. But let's handle the effects first. So when we apply a buff, we are gonna have to also add the effects of the buff until the buff goes away, which means that when we apply a buff, we will have to apply the particle effect, which is the particle effect here, and then as well as the tint here. So let's work that one out. To start off, right, the easiest thing that we can do is perhaps let me just test out the buff system, because the garlic already has a debuff that it applies, right? So let's just run the game, and we have garlic here. So I just want to touch an enemy and see whether it receives the buff. So this enemy is red now because it just got damaged, but I also want to see whether it has buffs. So it should have buffs. Oh, where is the buff? Buff. Gray list. The entity stats, we have a list of active buffs. It's not showing up. Active buffs. Where are the active buffs? We have the movement. We have the original color, but no active buffs. And we also have a null reference exception, which we have to fix. I just found a small error over here with the sorting. I think we probably have to release a video to address that. Let me just write down all the things I found. The noun reference sortable. Growth stat. Okay, we've got to address this issue first. This sortable thing. It's a pretty big issue. Sorted is now, then we use that will fix the issue. Let me just post the topic on the forum to address that, since we found a bug with the previous part. So that would be part 22, right? Use this is false. Let me just check what the problem is here. So here we're just trying to find a game object that's causing this issue. It's caused by the player. Wait, the player has sprite renderer, right? Why is the player not able to find this parameter? So my issue is that I overrode the start function, play movement. I think that's why. And the player movement. Under player movement, we forgot to. Did we update this in okay. Part 22. Implementing sortable and existing scripts. The player movement, yeah, so this should be there, right? It's not there in our script, which is why. So vector override, and then here we just call base. Very important. because if we don't call that, then that will not work. So this will be frames.start. So really forgot. Yeah. Stop. Go. And to event stay pass. Right. And So I'm gonna edit the post to add these parts in. Let's do a return. Okay, so now that we fixed this bug, let's just drop this onto the YouTube video as well, so that all this is documented. Just drop a comment on this video, huh?
Kodomo soft and steam. Just pin this up. Children.
Okay, let's continue with our code now that we have fixed this. We actually don't need this section here. Never mind, let's just leave it on first. The issue is that the buffs are not being listed on the enemies, which shouldn't be happening because I should be expecting to see buffs, right, on both the player and the enemy. So the player should have buffs on their stats, but I can't see the buff. Perhaps that means I'll have to do a serialized field, because we are inheriting empty sets, but then we are not getting the buff list. We just serialize the field then. Just for debugging purposes, temporarily, we can just serialize this. And serializing this should show the list. Oh, it's not showing because this is not serialized. System serial. There we go. So now it should show up the buff list. There we go. Now the buff list is shown. Even if I remove the serialized field here, this should still show up. We just update the article on this. So here we should have a serialized system. Serialized. How do you spell serialized? Serialized. Okay, so let's see how that turns out. I'm gonna save this and let's just play this. And I'm gonna hit a... Let me just hit a bat with the garlic and then we'll see whether it gets a buff. Now we have to keep restarting until we get a garlic. There we go, now we have a garlic. Let's hit something and then we'll see whether the buff is applied to the bat. So it gets a buff of garlic. And this buff is supposed to reduce the stats. So let's see if the stats have been reduced. No stat reduction. Which means we forgot to recalculate the stats, right? Whenever we apply a buff, we have to recalculate the stats. So apply the buff, recalculate stats. The recalculation of the stats are not applying, which is pretty annoying. Enemy stats, recalculate stats. Because over here, the actual stats should have the buffs, right? Where are the actual stats? Actual stats are the same. There's no change. So the buff is applied, but the stats are not modified. So here you see the buff is applied, and after a while the buff should go away. But the debuff is not being applied. There is a knockback multiplier of minus 0.3, right? It's not applying. And let's see if the buff goes. The buff does go away. So this works. But the stats are not being applied. So why would the stats not be applied? The stats not being applied because this piece of code should be below, right here. So this is a mistake from my part. So I guess we will have to change the code a little bit here. If we put it on top, right? Because we do have to boost the stats by curse and level. So yeah, actually, sorry, it makes sense. So we boost the stats first, and then we apply the modifications after that. So that means that let's try this again. So if we write our code correctly, the buffs should apply. So let me just hit the bat and see whether the buff applies to the bat. So the bat here receives a buff right here. It's the garlic buff. And there we go. So the knockback multiplier is reduced. So it's its resistance. So the freeze resistance is now minus 0.1. And because the buff is supposed to stack, if I hit it again, it should get 2 buffs. But here there's only one. Why is there only one buff? Gosh, shouldn't have 2 buffs. So it only applies once because the debuff only applies once. The stats are also only modified once. Let me just try this on another bat. I'm gonna grab another one of these red bats, and I'm just gonna boost the hit points of the bat. so that... Oh, I can't boost the hit point of that because it's all private. Never mind, let me just boost the base health. And that should, when I hit it, cause the health to update. And so with one buff, you will see, let's see what happens when the buff wears off. The stats should recalculate itself. So now that the buff has worn off, right, the stats are back normal, so the multiplier is 1 and there's no more resistances. So if I hit it multiple times, right, I should expect it to have the buff applied multiple times. Let me just try this on the... What's going on with these flowers, man? If I hit it multiple times, it should have a buff, right? Let me just catch one more of these flowers. Why does it flash now? It flashes until the buff goes away. And the buff does not stack. The buff should be stacking. Okay, so now we've got a couple of issues here. The flashing works very oddly now. Why does it flash red like that? Doesn't make sense. Anyway, I've hit it a couple of times. Let's see how many buffs are applied. Only one buff is applied. That's one thing. The other thing is the color is off. Why is the color off? I haven't changed the color. Is it because of the sortable? Maybe it's because of the sortable, huh? Because if I comment this out, I don't think the flashing will work so weird. It just flashes in and out, right? Doesn't make sense. No idea why it's flashing in and out. Let's wait for the flowers and see what's going on. There we go with the flowers. So the garlic has a buff, and the garlic is causing the damage to go out of whack. No idea why as well. Or is it the sortable? Let's see. Take the sortable script back. Oh, we got a garlic. Actually. Let's wait for the flower wall to spawn. There we go. So the issue, I'm pretty certain it's because of the buff system. It's causing the flash to appear and disappear, which I have no idea why it happens like that at the moment. So only the garlic does the red flashing. Seems like. See that? The enemy flashes red. Which I don't understand what's going on at all. That's flashing. And it flashes for quite a while. Oh, I get why it's I get why it's flashing now, because of the damage from the buff. So because it deals damage over time, even if the damage is 0, the buff still applies. So what we can do then is to we can change something and change the way that debuffing works. How is the debuffing counting down? We have update function that updates the debuff duration, right here. So it deals damage and it heals time, but we only want it to deal damage if damage is more than 0. So if B take damage more than heal will be this, and only if it's more than 0 it performs the heal. Heal is more than 0. So just some minor changes to prevent bugs from occurring. Otherwise, because every time you do damage, the enemy flashes, which is something that we don't want. And we might also want to go to enemy stats and prevent this from happening as well, right? If you deal 0 damage to the enemy, it shouldn't make the enemy flash. Or we can just move the damage flash inside here. I think that makes sense as well. Where is the enemy stats? Script as well. So this should be -1. And this should be removed. Undertake damage. whole part here is changed. This whole section here is changed. Let's edit this one consistent chunk. Okay. And the only and we don't need this whole section below here. Case. Just to repeat. Code. So this becomes A. And this is B. C. D. So the debuff should apply correctly now. Let's get a garlic again. Now we need to get the garlic stacked because the garlic is not stacking. And that means that somewhere in our code, the application of the buffs is going wrong. So the garlic buff stacks fully, right? Made it stack fully, so when I apply it multiple times, it should stack. See that it stacks fully? Does it make sense that it doesn't stack? What does it mean? If it stacks fully, it means that this section here should run, so then whenever I hit something, it should just apply the buff. Whether it has the buff or not, it should always apply. So you should get multiple copies of the buff, but we are not getting that. Okay, let's look at this, alright? So let me just try and hit a bat multiple times. And after hitting a bat 2 times, I pressed the wrong button. After hitting a bed multiple times, the bed should have multiple copies of the debuff, which it doesn't have. So let me just hit this bed once, one more. So with 2 hits, the buff should have 2 copies of the buff. But it doesn't. So I can try this on the flower as well, because you know, like with the flower wall, we have more health, right? The flowers have more health. Let me just deal damage. Okay, I think I get why. It's because the debuff doesn't last very long, right? What if I increase the length of the debuff to like 5 seconds? Because right now the garlic cools down in 1.3 seconds, and then the buff goes away after 1.3 seconds. So I guess that's why it's not applying multiple times. So right now it should apply multiple times, and I should get 2 buffs. Ah, there we go. Yeah. So sorry, that was my oversight. So then if I get 2 debuffs, the freeze will be minus 0.2, and then the knockback multiplier will be reduced to 0.4, which is, well, which makes sense, right? I guess one thing that we gotta do is gotta ensure that the knockback multiplier never goes below 0. I guess that makes sense. Because otherwise, the oh wait, it should be plus. The knockback multiplier should be plus, right? Because it increases the multiplier. Doesn't decrease the multiplier. So this should be plus. This should be plus. Because the more you get hit, the more you get knocked back. So this shouldn't ever be a minus. Because the minus just makes it harder to knock back the enemies, when in reality it should be easier. I want a garlic. So we're getting somewhere here. I just need to get the garlic again, and we can see it in action. And then we can start coding the buff and debuff effects. So if I hit the bat twice, right, like you've just seen here, the bat should have 2 debuffs, and the knockback multiplier should be increased. So it's now 1.6 because I've hit it twice with the garlic, and each debuff lasts for 5 seconds. So this works perfect. Right now, let's set the duration break to 1.3, and then we are gonna work out the effect system and the tinting system. So does the what am I trying to say? Does the garlic have a debuff effect? If not, we can just create a simple debuff effect. I think that can work very well. Let me just put together a simple debuff effect that will show that the enemy is affected by a debuff. So let me just do a garlic debuff and change this back to normal. So the first thing we want to do is to use the subtractive material. So if you don't know what that is, you can refer to our video on particle effects. So we prepare a couple of materials that we reuse over all of our particle effects to get a darker effect. Here we want to have a subtractive material because this is what allows us to get black particles. So we want the particles to be semi-black, and I think we can just introduce a little color over here. And we can reduce the emission to say 2 and just have a very small debuff effect. What if I set gravity modifier like this? The shape here is gonna be a hemisphere. Let me just make it have a short lifetime. And a small size as well. So say 2 to 4. And let's rein it in. So we just have this very basic particle effect that tells us the enemy is under some kind of effect. Maybe we have a small size over lifetime. Maybe a 3 over time of 10 would be great. And let's do a dampen as well, limit velocity over lifetime, just to rein the particles in. I want the particles to be snappy, but I don't want them to fly too far. So what we'll get is this little effect over here. See, once I dampen, the particle effects come a lot closer to each other. So this is what I want. Like just some sparks that appear, and then we can always add a extra particle effect here. That looks like this. It's default particle system, but I'm gonna add again the subtractive material. And now this time I will set the rate over here to 1, and the lifetime is also 1. This will be a constant lifetime of 1 and a speed of 0. So the particle effect stays in the same place. I will turn off shape so that it's just always in the center, right? And what's going on here is I'm going to increase the size to say 2. And I'll decrease the transparency a bit so that it's just, that's a little faded. And maybe we can just have a little bit of a dirty green color as well to it. Like that. So I just gotta play around with the color. And we're gonna do a size over lifetime, which is gonna be very interesting. And what I want is for it to go up and then come down again. So I'm gonna go up, go down. So then we get this debuff effect that basically looks like this. And it just shows us that, okay, so this enemy is affected by some kind of debuff, which is always great, you know. And the last thing you want to do is just to make sure that you move the particle effect into the game, and then make sure that it appears, because if it doesn't appear, then you have to increase the sorting layer for both your particle systems. Yeah, so that it appears like this. And then you can test it on the game, and if the particle doesn't appear to be very obvious, then it means you gotta increase the opacity. So I've got to max it out. And what we have here is just a simple debuff effect that you can apply. So I'm just gonna apply this to both the garlic debuff and the soul eater debuff, which I think works pretty well. Just call this the pulse. So then we have a simple garlic debuff effect for enemies. I can just test it out by putting an enemy on the screen with the particle effect. And then we can kind of see how that looks like. I think it looks pretty good. But maybe the pulse shouldn't just go to 0. Maybe the pulse. Oh yeah, I'm not showing the curves, right? Let me just move this out so I can show you the curves of how I do the. Because later on, if we make this into a video, then you know, otherwise we got to re-record the curves section. So what this curves thing, when I do a size over lifetime, right? What I'm going for is actually I'm clicking here on this graph and then selecting one of the shapes here. But I don't want the shape to just increase and decrease. I want it to increase and decrease. So I'm just gonna add a key over here at 0.5 and just shift the, I don't know what these are called, and then shift this keyframe over here. So then you see this thing will pulse up and pulse down. But I don't want the size to go all the way to 0, so I can just increase the size like that. So then what we'll get is this particle effect here that just pulses over an enemy, and then it just shows you the enemy is having some kind of a problem, which I think works pretty well. So now that we have this debuff, we can test it out. Let me just add this in the VFX section. This is called the garlic debuff. And I can delete this together with the enemy. It's just for testing. So now I can go back to my debuff. And I can assign the VFX to it. So let me just lock this. And let me find the file in my project right here. Like that. Object buffs. And just lock this. Then I can go to the VFX folder. There's garlic debuff. Let me just assign the garlic debuff to garlic. So what I want to do now is that whenever the enemy gets the garlic applied to them, it's just gonna have that effect playing on them. I think this will be pretty easy to code. For this to work, we will have to track a list of, under the buff, right? We're gonna track which particle effect is on the scene right now and destroy that when we are done. So when we add a buff to the entity under apply path. After we add the path, right, we will have to also instantiate any effects that it has. So this will be data. Okay. Data variations. Data get variant. And from here we have to find the effect and instantiate the effect. So if there is an effect, then we instantiate it. And we instantiate it under the parent game object. Which is to say, we instantiate it under the owner. We manage it inside the buffs. It makes more sense. Okay. So we have multiple copies of the bar. Then we check data. If the particle system here by the bar idea the debuff effect with one is no, it's not a good idea to put it here. Let's put it inside the buffs. So under the buff constructor, we also have to specify the owner. Owner. And this will be where we can add effects. the particle system. Okay. This is the particle system. This up. Save the effect so that we have pictures. It. So here we have effect goes to shape. So this is if the buff sets effect. So if there is an effect, then we instantiate buff sets effect. And we save the effect and we parent this to the owner. Dot transform. So this is to allow us to destroy the game object when we are done. So I'll put this over here. This. The owner is compulsory, right? Need to record the owner of the buff. So apply buff will create the buff effect. And then when the buff is removed, we remove the buff. We will also have to remove the effect associated with the buff. So here, instead of using this, maybe we should do a for each loop across all the buff. Oh, this should be into remove, sorry. So we look through everything that we want to remove. After removing the buff, we also have to check whether the buff has an effect. If the buff has an effect, then we also destroy the effect. We want to destroy the entire game object, not just the component. So then we can remove this section over here. And let's test this out first before we record this in the blog. So now that we have assigned a garlic debuff to the system, we should be able to get the debuff appearing on an enemy when we hit it with the garlic. So let's give it a try. Let's just try and get the garlic. There we go. So let's see if the debuff applies. And right away we can see it doesn't apply. Debuff doesn't apply. It's not applying. Not sure why it's not applying. If it's applying, oh, it's right there. It is right there, it's just not showing up. What if I move this bat away? Oh, it's showing up in the wrong place. Okay, so one thing to take note is make sure that your debuff, the position is set to 0. And your rotation as well actually. So I forgot to do that. So because this is meant to be parented to an object, you want to set everything back to 0. And then let's just test this out to see whether with a 0 rotation everything works. It's very important. So you see, for example, that my particle effect, right, when I play it takes a second for the black ball to come out. So we have to pre-warm it. So then it just starts out with the ball. Still doesn't start out with the ball. What else can I do? Because it's taking too long to start up. I can have a burst of 1, I guess. Oh, a duration of 1, does this work? My bad, it's not, this doesn't need to be pre-warmed, it's the shockwave inside, the pulse inside needs to be pre-warmed. Yeah, so once I pre-warm this, the pulse inside, then the ball should appear instead of delaying for a while before appearing. See that? So let me just pre-warm this so that it appears right away. And yeah, so the prefab, make sure that you zero out everything inside here, otherwise when you attach it to something it's gonna appear somewhere else like you saw just now. So let me just try this again. Let's just get garlic and then we can try this again. So when I hit it, you see the effect should appear. See that now the bat has this thing. It's just the effect is appearing behind the bat. So the other thing that you can do is you just gotta make sure that your debuffs, the prefab, right? Make sure that the prefab's debuffs, the order and layer and everything is set properly as well. Let me just add this to say 10 because I want it to appear over everything, right? So that it's more obvious. Pulse as well, I want to set the order and layer to 10. Let me just get the garlic again. And we'll see the debuff here. So you see that now the debuff is appearing. It's not very obvious, but you know it's there. And it's pretty cool, right? That we have the debuff. Debuff is appearing, but when the debuff goes away now, the effect is not destroyed. So that is the other problem we have. This bat here obviously doesn't have the debuff anymore. Let me just show this to you. This bat here has no debuff anymore. The buff is gone, but the effect is still here. So then that means that my code for destroying the debuff is not working. Maybe the buff is not saved. That is a possibility. So this is added, and we are setting the effect, right? This effect over here. Let's try this again with something. So now the debuff is applied, you can see the effect here. But the debuff is recorded as well. It's right here. But it never goes away. So maybe the reason it doesn't go away is because some part in my code is wrong. But I'm destroying the game object. I don't know why this is not working. Trying to destroy the game object here. Print. Let me just print the message to see whether this part here fires. Might not fire. It might not be firing, which is why it's causing the issue. Now I gotta get the garlic again. So now we have garlic again. Let's hit a bat. So the debuff, again it applies. The debuff is applying to the bat. Right here you can see it. And we want to see whether when the debuff is over, does it... So that code doesn't run at all. Because the debuff doesn't go away when the buff is no longer active. So I'm not sure what I'm missing here. I'm missing something for sure. Now we gotta keep replaying until we get garlic again. Get that. Okay, there we go. Let's touch something. So now this bat has debuff. Right here. And I want to see what happens when the debuff is gone. But nothing is... Debuff is gone. But this is not printed. Perhaps I'm looking at the wrong place, because over here when the buff is expired, it just gets removed here. Oh, that's why. So I have to update this section over here. And not only that, I also have to, for the expired buff, once the buff is expired, so then we do the same thing over here. We look through everything right here. And we do the same thing here. So let's remove this part. So remove the buffs from outside the. So that's because the buffs are removed in update. They're not removed under remove buff. So that's an oversight of my part. Okay, let's try this again. The buffs should now go away properly. So I'm hitting the bed. After a while, the debuff should go away. So the last thing that you'll notice is that the debuff, when it goes away, right, it just disappears. Let me show this to you again. The bed gets hit, the sparks just disappear, like they just get cut away. It doesn't fade away. So maybe we can make it more obvious here by adding them. See that? It just goes away after a while. It doesn't fade away. And the reason it doesn't fade away is actually a very simple reason. Maybe I gotta make the debuff more obvious. And that can be done by... I think the debuff is a little too inobvious. If you want to make it more obvious, we can always... Let me just grab this out here. Where's my particle window? Go on. There we go. So if we want to make it more obvious, we can make it bigger. So the pulse, perhaps the pulse can afford to be bigger. Say maybe 4, even 4 is... Let's try 3 first. It can be bigger and then the lifetime can be shorter. Then this way the pulse is faster. So the lifetime can be shortened and then we can have a higher rate over time like that. Yeah, perhaps this is better. Yeah. So now it's much more apparent. And for us to, because right now when the pulse gets deleted, you see we just delete game object. So it's very sudden. The removal is very sudden. Let me just set the pre-warm here. And I'll apply the changes to the prefab itself. Just apply all changes. Make sure to set it back to 0. Yeah, so then the debuff will appear like that, right? It's more obvious. And we want the simulation space to be walled. What this means is that when the debuff disappears, you will still see the particle around and it will fade away after a while. So it doesn't just snap away like that. So right now if I delete it, it snaps away. But if I change the simulation space here to world, then you will see that there will be a lag. When the debuff goes away, the particle will slowly fade away, which is a much cooler effect. Let me just get the garlic appearing and then I can show this to you. Okay, there we go. So here, let me just hit the enemy with the garlic. Still a little bit abrupt. I mean, there's a small difference, but at least it doesn't fade away, it doesn't snap away the effect. So now that we have the debuff effect working, the next implementation we want to make is you look at our buffs. We also have a tint that we have to add to the enemy when they get hit. So the next thing we're gonna work on is that. Hi Anthony, thanks for dropping in to support the stream, and I'm glad you enjoy it. That's the reason why we make these videos. So if no one was watching all the parts that we were making, then I wouldn't be making these. Of course, more viewers are always nice, but it takes time to get the viewership up. It's a nice feeling to see that your work is being appreciated and being used. So thank you so much. I hope you enjoy the tutorial series. Yeah, so this is part 23 where we are creating a buff system. So then we can add on different kinds of buffs to enemies in the future, like for example the freeze or like burning, or just different effects. Right now we are doing the garlic effect, so if you hit something with garlic, it actually increases the amount of knockback they get. And then we were just designing a particle effect, and then this particle effect, it applies for as long as the buff is active. And I may have made the particle effect a little too obvious, because right now it's just covering the entire enemy, so gotta strike a balance between the visibility of the effect and how overwhelming it is, I guess. Just reduce the size of that pulse to smaller value. So let me just see how this looks. Gotta get a garlic. I may not have the time to do the tinting feature for this stream, so I may have to come back to this tomorrow. I have to be somewhere soon. There we go. I'm waiting for the flower wall so that we can see the full extent of the buff. But everything that is spawning here are the mobs. We're not getting any flower walls, unfortunately. Oh, we have Spellbinder that increases our duration, right? This is a good time to test and see whether the buff that is applied actually lasts for longer. But we have to see the flower wall, we have to use it on the flower wall to be sure. But the RNG is not giving us any flower walls, keep giving us mobs. So we have to wait even longer for this. There we go, got a flower wall now. So let me just hit them with a debuff and then we will see how long the debuff lasts. Should be more than 1.3 seconds. Right here, let's look at the debuff. Debuff mode. Active buffs, remaining duration is pretty long. This is just hit, duration is more than 1.3, there we go. So because if we grab the Spellbinder item, it increases the duration of weapons. So then Garlic has a duration as well, around 1.3. So the buff is actually, the duration is increased, which is pretty cool. I'm really happy that all the math is working out, and then this is how it looks when you apply the buffs to a whole bunch of Okay, so we have the particle effect showing up fine. Next thing we want to do is, I doubt we have time for that. Maybe let me just record what changes I've made, all the changes I've made to the entity stats object, and then we will continue this in the stream tomorrow. We just record all of the new stuff. You know, the hardest part about doing this is maintaining all the changes. That's the hardest thing to do. It's not really the coding that's the hardest. The coding just takes a little bit of thinking, but the maintenance of the scripts, oh man, this is really tedious. This part is added, and this part here is removed. And the other thing that's added is this part is removed. This part is added. And what else did we change? This part, right? This part is changed. And what is changed is we are just factoring in. We are factoring in the effect right here. So tomorrow when we add the tinting, that will modify this class a lot more. So duration multiplier is it in the original one? Okay, it is. Alright, so that's all for this stream today. We'll stream again same time tomorrow, so tune in for that. We're gonna finish up this buff and debuff system. Almost there. So then once this is done, then I'll be very happy, and then we can create this new weapon, this clock rancid thing. It's a freezing weapon that has a chance of applying. So then tomorrow, remember we have these these enemy resistances as well. So enemies, they have freeze resistances, and they have debuff resistances and kill resistances, right? Right now we've only coded something for the kill resistance, but we have to code something for the freeze and debuff resistance as well. So we've got a, yeah, so tomorrow we'll address these two stats as well, which are, well, they're important as well, right? All the stats have to work. So let me just give myself a mention. Oops. Okay, let me save one more draft. Alright, so that's all I have for you. I'll see you tomorrow.